Welcome everybody to the strange and scary mysteries of the month, where we find the craziest true crime stories from all around the world currently going down, and lay them out for you here to wrap your head around. And a happy Halloween to all you spooky season lovers out there. Here are the strange and scary mysteries of the month for October 2024. Number 5. Andrea Bowman's disappearance. On March 11th of 1989, Dennis Bowman called the police to report his 14-year-old daughter Andrea missing. He explained to them that she had run away from their Hamilton, Michigan home, and on top of it, some cash he had stashed away was also gone. According to him, it wasn't the first time Andrea had disappeared, and that it was like somebody had flipped a switch in his daughter a couple years prior, as she had started running away and getting into trouble. Only this time, Andrea didn't come back. Initially, there were reports of sightings, and the teen seen in a nearby town at a skating rink, or even reports coming as far away as Indiana. Those leads eventually dried up, and Andrea Bowman became another cold case in small-town Michigan. And for her birth mother, Kathy Turkanian, the news came as a shock. And Kathy had placed Andrea, originally named Alexis, up for adoption when she was just 9 months old, believing she was giving her daughter a chance at a better life. When Kathy was contacted in 2010 to provide a DNA sample, well, she hoped it was because her daughter was looking for her. Instead, it was to see if an unidentified body found in a Wisconsin cornfield was her biological child, and she wasn't. And so, Kathy started her own search for Andrea, unaware of just how deep down the rabbit hole she would actually go. Through a Facebook page she created called Find Andrea Bowman, Kathy connected with old friends and acquaintances of the girl. And they shared stories that ultimately painted a dark picture of Bowman's home life, a side of her adoptive father Dennis that Kathy never expected to learn. As she dove deeper, Kathy began to fear that Dennis wasn't just a neglectful parent. She suspected he had everything to do with Andrea's disappearance, and her motherly instinct couldn't have been more right. On the surface, Dennis was a Navy veteran, seemingly upstanding member of the community and the father of 2 girls. But looking deeper, back in 1981, Dennis had been sentenced to prison for assaulting a teenage girl, an event that happened just a year after the unsolved murder of Kathleen Doyle down in Norfolk, Virginia. A crime that years later would catch up with him. In November of 2019, Dennis would be officially arrested for the murder of Kathleen, a young Navy wife whose life ended tragically in September of 1980.
Sat up and it started to scream, and I covered her mouth with my left hand, and I went to push her back down with my right. I still had that little penknife in my hand. Right. And when I went to push her back down, she grabbed that hand, and it went in right there.
Investigators had finally linked him to the crime using modern DNA technology. It turned out that during the time of Kathleen's murder, Dennis just happened to be stationed right in Norfolk for a Navy training camp. For years, Kathleen's murder had remained unsolved until a chance encounter between 2 detectives, one working Andrea's disappearance and the other working Kathleen's cold case, led them to Dennis. And with him now in custody, Kathy's campaign for answers intensified. She began calling the Bowmans' home repeatedly and put up billboards and even enlisted authorities to dig up their yard. But nothing seemed to turn up, until Dennis himself began to crack. In a chilling confession to his wife Brenda in late 2019, Dennis admitted that on the day Andrea went missing, he had confronted her after finding her coming out of their bedroom. Andrea, furious and scared, threatened to expose Dennis, telling him that she would tell everybody he had been assaulting her. In a rage, the man then hit her. She fell down the stairs, and by the time Dennis reached her, his adoptive daughter was dead. And looking to avoid prison, Dennis then moved her body to the barn out back. And there, he burned her belongings and eventually disposed of the girl's remains in the most horrific way, dismembering her and placing her in a cardboard barrel, which he put out for the trash. But later, in a letter to his wife, Dennis told Brenda he had given Andrea a proper grave next to a local cemetery, but that was just another in a long series of lies.
30-some years. Yes, 31 years. As long as I had tell you, you had hope. I'm sorry for deceiving you. And I know what your fear was.
Dennis eventually confessed to burying Andrea in the backyard of one of their previous homes. Authorities excavated the site in February of 2020, where they found skeletal remains confirmed to be Andrea's. The daughter, Kathy had been fighting to find for over 3 decades, had been right there all along, hidden in a barrel beneath layers of lies and deceit. And Dennis Bowman, for his crimes, is currently serving multiple life sentences for both Andrea and Kathleen's murders. Number 4. Montana Mom Missing. When nobody could reach Jermaine Charlo's cell phone in June of 2018, her friends and family immediately knew something bad had happened. Jermaine was an open book, sharing her life online with everybody, her presence lighting up across all social media.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jermaine. This is now going to be my blog about me.
But one day, that light just went out. Despite numerous calls and texts, no one could reach her. It wasn't long before her aunt, Valenda, took action, reporting Jermaine missing to the Missoula Police Department. And it's now been 6 years since that call went out, and still, Jermaine Charlo is yet to be found. As she was last seen on the evening of June 15th of 2018 at the Badlander Bar in downtown Missoula. A security camera actually captured her out behind the bar just before midnight, and standing near her in the footage was Michael DeFrance, her ex-boyfriend and the dad of her 2 kids. And the 2 of them had plans that night, perhaps trying to work things out, and they are seen leaving together, walking down the alley and out of the camera's sight. According to DeFrance, he and Jermaine got into his truck and he dropped her off at the Orange Street Food Farm, a nearby supermarket. Though later, DeFrance changed his story, saying instead that he had dropped her off in a residential neighborhood a few blocks away. And he claimed he had planned to stay with a friend named Cassidy. Detectives were intrigued to say the least because there was no Cassidy in Jermaine's life that anyone knew about. And as it so happens, Jermaine's true destination that evening was her current boyfriend Jacob's apartment. And Jacob, who was out of town, had offered her a place to stay, and so it's believed that she lied to DeFrance about staying with Cassidy to keep her relationship with Jacob a secret from her ex. By 1 a.m., Jacob began to worry, and he had tried calling Jermaine, but she wouldn't pick up. He later told detectives that Jermaine had mentioned DeFrance's behavior the day before, how he had been yelling at her, demanding to know if she was dating anybody else. It was clear to Jacob that Michael still had feelings for Jermaine. DeFrance, however, has never officially been named a suspect in her disappearance. Within a few days, the search for Jermaine had begun, but time was already slipping away. In the early hours of June 16th, between 2 a.m. and 10 a.m., Jermaine's cell phone was still active, pinging off a cell tower in Navarro Hill, a heavily forested area north of Missoula. Coincidentally, or perhaps not, Navarro Hill was where DeFrance lived at the time. And DeFrance admitted that Jermaine's phone had been with him, but his explanation was strange. He said she left it behind and he tried unsuccessfully to access it. And then, 2 days later, he claimed to have discarded it along Highway 12 in Idaho. Authorities searched for that phone, but it was never found. DeFrance's inconsistencies obviously have raised suspicions, but still, there's not enough evidence to charge him with anything. On August 2nd of 2018, officers obtained a warrant to search DeFrance's property. They used thermal imaging and video surveillance, hoping to find clues. But if they found anything significant, well, they've kept it under wraps. Those searches continued into the fall. No officers seized firearms that DeFrance wasn't legally allowed to possess. There was no sign of his ex. Detective Guy Baker, who took over the case 10 days after Jermaine went missing, has been relentless in his search for answers. He's followed every lead, including the possibility that Jermaine might have been trafficked. Montana's vast highways make it easy for people to vanish, but ultimately, investigators ruled out human trafficking as a likely scenario. Instead, they believe something else happened, something closer to home.
Someone out there knows what happened to Jermaine Charlo. Jermaine walks out of view, so maybe somebody saw something that has never thought about contacting us. So if anybody has any information about that night or any aspect of this investigation, I encourage them to call me.
In April of 2023, Michael DeFrance was convicted on firearms charges and sentenced to 21 months in prison. But even as he faced justice for his illegal gun possession, Jermaine's disappearance remained a cold, dark mystery. And for her family, true justice means bringing Jermaine home and making sure that her story, and others like it, is never forgotten. Number 3. The Paul Lowe Tragedy. 61-year-old Paul Lowe wasn't just any photographer. He was a man whose lens captured the raw realities of conflict. From the brutal siege of Sarajevo during the Bosnian War to stories of human suffering and hope across the globe, Lowe's work had touched countless lives. And he had been a storyteller of some of the world's darkest chapters. However, on Saturday, October 12th, well, he became the story himself. It was around 3:28 that afternoon when Los Angeles County Sheriff's officers responded to a report of an assault at Mount Baldy Road near Stoddard Canyon Falls. And what they found was devastating. A white male adult suffering from severe trauma in his upper torso. Paul was pronounced dead at the scene, his life ended by a knife wound to the neck. The perpetrator of the crime was somebody nobody suspected. Authorities soon detained a young man seen driving erratically away from the scene who crashed a few miles up the road in a solo traffic accident. And this person was then identified as 19-year-old Amir Lowe, Paul Lowe's own son. The LA County DA's office confirmed recently that Amir had been charged with the murder of his father. A day out on the hiking trails turned extremely violent in an instant. Details as to why are not entirely clear just yet, and authorities have remained tight-lipped, refusing to speculate on the possible motives. All that is known for sure is that a family, and a world that has grown to appreciate Lowe's artistry and humanity, is now left grappling with a loss that defies comprehension.
So I just want him to know that his spirit will live on through those pictures and many others that he's taken.
And Paul Lowe had dedicated his life to telling the untold stories, to shining a spotlight on the places the world preferred to ignore. So for now, we're all left to wonder, how did a man who faced the horrors of war with courage become the victim of a senseless act of violence in his own family? Amir is scheduled to make his first court appearance at the West Covina Courthouse, and as the case unfolds, the world will be watching, hoping for answers, but knowing that no explanation will bring back the man who captured so much. Number 2. A Sinister Payback. On a cold weekend in January of 2018, Dean Wright was struggling to get in touch with his older brother Raymond. The 55-year-old master carpenter and beloved family man was someone Dean spoke to every day. But now 2 days had passed with still no word from Ray. No texts, no calls, nothing. And Dean reached out to Ray's daughters, Haley and Kennedy, but they too had their calls go straight to voicemail. And so he headed to his brother's workshop and home in the Sacramento suburbs, finding everything eerily in place. Everything except for the fact that Ray's truck was gone. It would take a few more days, but Dean eventually returned to Ray's house, determined to find answers, and this time he brought a spare key with him. Immediately upon entering, he smelled marijuana smoke. And that's when he knew there was a problem because Dean hated the stuff. After taking a few steps inside, that's when a cup on the kitchen counter caught his eye. One he'd never seen there before, and still covered in condensation. Every instinct told him that this was wrong. Out of nowhere, the door to the garage bust open, and Dean found himself face to face with a stranger. "Get out of here," the man yelled, and Dean, with his heart pounding, demanded, "Who are you? Where's Ray?" The intruder took a step towards him, eyes wild, and then turned abruptly and bolted out back. Dean, shaking hands, immediately dialed 911. Police arrived fast, and Dean showed them the cup left on the counter. Still fresh with soda and ice, it was their first real clue. 10 days later, police would go on to find Ray's truck, abandoned in an apartment complex, its license plate stripped off.
10 days after his disappearance, police discovered Ray's abandoned pickup truck in a North Highlands apartment complex.
Brown stains, which turned out to be Ray's blood, were discovered on the carpet liner in the back of the vehicle. And so it appeared, Ray had not just been kidnapped, but likely something far worse had happened. But what exactly? Well, 6 days after finding the truck, an officer happened to notice a white van with an expired registration and current sticker tabs that didn't belong. When the officer tried to pull the van over, the driver hit the gas, leading them on a chase that tore through the streets at 100 miles per hour. That pursuit ended violently when the van crashed into another vehicle, leaving the driver with a broken leg. The person behind the wheel was Victor Gray, a man who it turned out was no stranger to trouble. And as police dug in, it was then that they discovered that the registration tab on Gray's van had come from none other than Ray's truck. It was the first undeniable link between Victor Gray and Ray's disappearance, and it wasn't the last. While Gray sat in jail, the story took another twist. Investigators got a hit on Gray's DNA, a match to the straw in that mysterious cup left in Ray Wright's kitchen. And Gray, a convicted felon, had his DNA on file, and now the pieces were beginning to fit together. Inside that crashed van, investigators unearthed what they would later call a treasure trove of evidence. Among the items was a hat embroidered with Ray Wright design. There was a bloody rain jacket, Ray's shattered cell phone, his driver's license, and a broken pair of his glasses. On Gray's cell phone, investigators then found a photo of a handwritten letter addressed to somebody named Bob. The letter's contents made it clear that Victor had grievances with this Bob. Those grievances were about not being paid, specifically not being paid for delivering the dude. "I'm done waiting. I need a fat package today." Later on in the letter, it mentioned hand delivering you your revenge. When investigators dug into Ray Wright's past more, they uncovered a tragic event that might hold the answer to who this Bob character was. In November of 2011, Ray had driven drunk, causing an accident that nearly killed a couple, Robert Bobby Manor and his wife. Ray was convicted of felony DUI in order to pay more than $275,000 to his victims. Though he had turned his life around since then and quit drinking and rejoined AA, the debt remained largely unpaid. Manor, left with chronic pain and a permanent limp, had never forgiven Ray.
He told me he took care of whatever. Something he was trying to take care of for a long time.
He didn't give me details. He just told me that he took care of it. He felt good about that.
So in the end, even though Ray has never been seen since the day he went missing, because of the evidence left behind, Bob and Victor were convicted of kidnapping and murder, and will now spend the rest of their lives behind bars. Number 1. The Demon Next Door. Down in Jefferson Parish, Louisiana, 68-year-old Charles Davis had been battling the lingering effects of COVID-19. The virus had stolen his health, leaving him weakened and dependent on oxygen. And his body had withered, losing over 70 pounds, and his heart was heavy with grief after the loss of his living girlfriend to the same ruthless virus. Charles was fighting every day to regain some semblance of a normal life, but little did he know that the real threat wasn't a virus. It was the man living right beneath him. 42-year-old Jerry Gelpy lived in the apartment below Charles. The neighbors in the complex saw him as a quiet, perhaps somewhat odd presence in the building, but nothing that warranted concern. However, behind the closed door of his place, Gelpy's behavior was far from okay. He had a sick obsession with knives, a large collection, and his increasingly erratic outburst hinted at something being wrong, but no one could have expected what was to come. On a tragic day in February of 2021, Gelpy gained access to Charles's apartment, and there he attacked him in the bathroom. The brutality of the attack was shocking. The bathroom sink was torn from the wall in the struggle, and Charles ended up in the bathtub where Gelpy stabbed him at least 16 times. And Charles fought back, his hands bearing the defensive wounds of a man desperate to survive, but his weakened state left him with no chance against the younger man. And the scene was one of chaos and horror. Frail Charles, who had survived a deadly virus, only to fall victim to the real monster next door. After the attack, Gelpy tried to cover his tracks. He washed his hands in the kitchen, discarded his bloody clothing, and got rid of the knife. And Charles's daughter discovered her father's body on February 9th after he failed to answer her calls. When questioned, Gelpy played the part of an innocent bystander. He claimed he knew nothing about Charles's death and hadn't been in the apartment. He even tried to divert suspicion by blaming a local homeless man, but detectives soon uncovered the truth. And Gelpy had a history of violence, and his DNA was found under Charles's fingernails and on that kitchen sink. And Gelpy had previous incidents involving knives, one at a Walmart, where he pulled one on two men after a dispute over COVID-19 masks, and another at a pharmacy where he threatened a security officer while trying to steal teeth whitening strips. His violent tendencies were well documented, but perhaps the most chilling part of Gelpy's story was his attempt to manipulate the system. He was once arrested, he claimed insanity. He called himself the Son of God and insisted that Charles was the strongest demon he had ever encountered. In court, he pointed to detectives and accused them of being demons as well. But this wasn't a man lost in the grips of psychosis, and this was a calculated attempt to escape justice. Gelpy had faked mental illness before, back in 2004, to avoid consequences in the Navy, and physicians determined he was pretending once again. The jury saw through Gelpy's act, and so recently, he was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Charles Davis, as well as obstruction of justice for destroying evidence. The judge sentenced him to life in prison plus 40 years, ensuring that Jerry would never walk free again. In a final moment of clarity, Judge Frank Brandisi delivered a powerful message. He said, "You accused this man of being a demon, and you were the only demon that day." So there were the strange and scary mysteries of the month for October 2024. If you enjoyed this, please remember to subscribe and hit the bell so you know when we're putting out our new content. And if you want more exclusive episodes, please consider checking us out over on Patreon. And thanks so much for watching. I'll see you all in the next one.